8th of March election. And it was interesting because there were Malay scholars there, and I detailed...
Which university was this?
This is in Adelaide, in South Australia. And I detailed some of the things that led to HINDRAF, you know, like the body snatching of Everest Murthy, and the destruction of the temples. And I said that it seems to me, as an outside observer, the snapping point for most Malaysian Indians occurred when the temple was destroyed just before Deepavali. That was the snapping point for a lot of people. They just felt that we're being treated like people in South Africa under apartheid, and we just can't take any more of this. This was the impression I got. When I was talking, a lot of these Malay scholars leading to the HINDRAF demonstrations, people agreeing to join you. You know, this huge demonstration was something unusual in Malaysia. People generally, I mean, there were the Reformasi demonstrations after Anwar was arrested, but people don't normally demonstrate like that. And the Indians had the reputation of being a placid community. And a lot of the Malay scholars were completely unaware of this background, you know, the destruction of temples and all this sort of thing. So for me it was interesting that even in Malaysia, local scholars were unaware of how the Indian community was being subject to one outrage after another. You know, there are Malay scholars like Farish Noor who understand the problem in quite detail, and in good detail, and there's other activists. Generally speaking, a lot of people were unaware this was going on. And
you said you were writing a book.
Yes, that's right. But I've called it From the Malacca Sultanate to HINDRAF.
Why HINDRAF?
Because that seems to me to be one of those points where Malaysian history changes direction. The 8th of March election was a very unusual event. I mean, the Barisan National lost their 2/3 majority. 5 states were held by the opposition. All of a sudden you found DAP and PAS, Keadalan people working together on the same platforms, which the racial structure of Malaysia said was impossible. So it seemed to, and you got the idea that maybe Malaysia was going to mature into a society where communalism wasn't an issue anymore, that you had needs-based policies rather than racial-based policies. And so I think from HINDRAF represents that point where Indian opinion crystallised, that they just weren't going to... Dr.Carl Vadivella had always boasted that he could deliver the Indian vote, and for many elections he had, but on the 8th of March he failed and he lost his seat. And now...
Why do you think the HINDRAF?
Well, this is from an outsider's perspective. I think each time I've come up for Taipasim, I have talked to my Indian friends, and each time the frustration and the anger has grown. And when I came up in 2007, I wrote a letter to my wife, which I've still got at home, and I said, this can't go on. Something is going to happen. People are just not going to accept this anymore. The Indian community is really angry. And there are all these things going on. Like Everest Murthy was a case in point. And then you had the case of Ravati and her children being taken from her and so on. And there was no idea that these people had feelings of their own, that maybe they were individuals that cared about their families and cared about each other. This was just pure bureaucracy ruling their lives. This sort of thing happened to Aboriginals in Australia. They were separated from their families, their children were taken away and so on. So I can relate to from the Australian history what is actually going on in Malaysia. But as I say, these are outsiders' perceptions. It just struck me, and even now, even people in the MIC will tell me HINDRAF did this one thing. They moved the focus on onto the Indian community. From being the most neglected community, all of a sudden the Indian community became the most debated community. And so you had, to me, you had these two reactions. You had the Malay ultras that said these people should never have been given citizenship. We made a terrible mistake in giving them citizenship. To others who feel, now here's the problem, how do we deal with it? So it seems to me that Najib has decided he's going to throw a few sweeteners to the Indian community. You know, the little India in brickfields and a few scholarships here and there, but not addressing the underlying structural problems. I'm not too sure what the future is now, but it's just interesting that the Indian community has just shown that it's not going to be taken for granted anymore, and I think that is the real change that I've noticed. When I came up this year, Indians were more willing to talk about their problems. They are more assertive.
Why do you say that? Why is the change?
It seems to me, again, as an outsider, that the HINDRAF demonstrations were the point where they said, we're not going to take this anymore. We are going to be members of the community as well, that we exist. And it's interesting because I've studied a great deal about Indian history in Malaysia, and every time Indians have attempted to assert themselves, they've been oppressed. You know, you look at the Klang Valley strikes of 1941. Then you had the period where Subhas Chandra Bose united the Indian community. Immediately the British came back, they threw these people into jail. In the outbreak of the emergency in 1948, they arrested all radical Indian Union leaders and put them in detention. Even now, when I studied in London, those files are not available. You can't access those files. Some of them are under classification for 100 years.
What is your view on HINDRAF?
Well, my view was HINDRAF was waiting to happen. An organisation like this was going to happen.
And what made you say that?
Well, the frustration was so great. All it needed really was a group of leaders and the MRC was doing nothing. And there was still a lot of anger about the Kampur Medan incident. A lot of official papers blamed the Indians for the attacks. You know, one of the assemblywoman actually said, we've been patient for so long. It leads people to outrage. You're blaming the victim. It's like, as you know, if there is a mentality among some men that if a woman gets blamed, gets raped, they will say she was asking for it. And this is what led to feminism in Australia. You know, it was that sort of outrage. So I think this is what's going to happen here. I've been coming to Malaysia, I lived in Malaysia from 76 to 79. I've been coming here to Private since 81. And during the last few years I've really seen anger grow. Even humble people